She described herself as being very ugly or grotesque. I was a monster. People would, peer through the garden gate and look at her and run away in fright because she was not a pretty sight.
Would you like to begin by introducing yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Margaret Anne Mills, a Sister of Compassion. Grew up in Central Hawke's Bay on the Argyle stock route, which is behind Waipawa.
And you're currently the leader of the Sisters?
At the moment, I'm the congregational leader of the Sisters of Compassion. I came to be with the Sisters in 1975, and I made my first profession in 1978. I think it was, 3 years later.
What led you to the Sisters of Compassion in particular?
So I was at Teachers College in Palmerston North and very interested in special education, the learning difficulties of children with physical and intellectual disabilities. And I'd done some research, where could I get this special training? And I could have got it in Australia or in England at that time, but not here in New Zealand. So it was not possible for me to venture forward. But a careers advisor said, why don't you go and have a look at the school in the Wairarapa in Carterton? So I did, and it was run by the Sisters of Compassion. And this was my first real introduction to the Sisters of Compassion. Although I'd been at school at St Mary's in Wellington, I really didn't know who these people were. But the school was amazing, and the children were very active, very vibrant. And I still remember vividly the evening meal. It was spaghetti. And the sisters were not only with a white habit and veil, but they had a white overall. And there seemed to be spaghetti from one end of the room to the next. But the children were happy, the sisters were happy, and I was totally blown away by this experience. And I asked one of the sisters, how can I get into this work? And one of them said, you could join us. And I said, oh, you must be joking, and went off, finished my teaching degree and taught in Flaxmere out of Hastings, but there was still this nag. So get in the car, go down to Carterton again, have another look, and still that engagement or that desire to be engaged in this work was very strong. And I had to make a choice whether to choose a government school or a private or Catholic school. And the sisters were running a school at Island Bay at that time, and so that's why I joined, and I taught at that school at that time. But was just going to give it 3 years, get it out of my system, have a bit of experience with teaching children with learning difficulties, and go off about my business, hoping to get married, etc. But I'm still here, and those 3 years are well up.
Was there a particular experience or anything like that started this desire in you to work with children with learning disabilities?
I remember I was still at school, and there was just a very simple brochure, and it was labelled IHC, and it was their appeal brochure. And that's what attracted me, which is quite strange. It was just on the floor, and I remember the moment quite distinct. Yeah, I'd like to do that. I'd like to be involved in some way with people with disabilities. But it was a moment. I think I was only 16 at the time. And so teaching, I fell into teaching, which led me to Carterton, which led me to the Sisters of Compassion.
Can you tell us a bit about your foundress, Suzanne Aubert?
Suzanne Aubert, I've learned and keep learning over the years, a young woman, she had this desire to be a missionary to Aotearoa, to share the gospel with the Māori people. And she just had this huge desire and came to New Zealand on a whaling boat with other missionaries under the guidance of Bishop Pompalia. And then just her journey, the ups and downs of life, like her, it was not an easy road right until her death, but she trusted in God. She'd been guided by St. John Mari Vianney, who was her spiritual mentor, her spiritual director, and she just trusted his guidance and that deep call that she had from God. And so that her story, it continues to be an inspiration. And having had the privilege working alongside others for the cause, the long journey of canonisation for Meri Hōhepa Suzanne Aubert, I've learnt more and more and more. The everyday stuff, the ordinariness, the frustrations, the joys, but primarily getting on about God's business, but knowing that Suzanne knew that if it was meant to be, God would guide. If it wasn't, you let it go. And in those moments of letting go, if God wanted to happen, there would be what she described as the moment of God. We might say today, that was an intervention of God. But she always talked about the moment of God. That was God's timing. And it's almost like, it's not, but it's almost like God is pushing you to the brink. And God saying, do you trust me? Do you really trust me? And then there's this moment of God.
And I suppose God had a hand all through her childhood as well. I was reading yesterday how some experiences shaped her desire to work with children and children with disabilities.
That's very much so. She had a brother and he died at a young age, but today we would probably call him a hydrocephalic, had a large head, but she was really, she observed him and knew how to mend things, fix things like wind up clocks and things like that in his day. And you often see that with people with disabilities. They're either great artists or mathematicians, or they can focus on something and they're brilliant. So she noticed that, but her own experience of falling into an iced up pond, very little at the age of 2, possibly 2.5, with her older brother. But it left her with, she was under the iced water for a period, and eventually dragged out by an adult. But she was there long enough to have an eye problem. She couldn't walk that well. So she was very young when it happened, but she wasn't able to go to school till she was 9. And she looked disfigured. Her mother must have been an amazing woman too, because she took her to different shrines, different medical people at the time, for her to gain healing. And it was, eventually she got her movement back, she learnt to walk, but in the process, she described herself as being very ugly or grotesque. I was a monster. And people would, peer through the garden gate and look at her and run away in fright because she was not a pretty sight. So she knew that experience of people being scared of her, people making fun of her, of being very different. And as she grew up and as she was in this country, she had no fear of going out, even by herself. She would journey through villages, through Māori pa in villages, on her own, not worried, because she thought she was so ugly, no one would be interested in her. And so in a way it was like an upside down blessing. The disability, or what she termed her ugliness, was like her protection. So it's a very interesting way of looking at it. When she was in her 20s and in Auckland with the little order that Pompalia had formed, the Holy Family group, she was always making concoctions of medicine. But like many of us, got down to pull the cork out of a bottle of ammonia, and of course it exploded in her face. And she was very unwell because of that. And of course it didn't help her eyesight either. But she also, as a result of that, her stomach wasn't very good after that either. So she had these, they were long-term sufferings from adventures in life. So she had her own experience, so she could well empathise with people who struggled with disabilities, with illnesses.
I suppose that's where the name of the sisters came from, the compassion, to suffer with.
To suffer with, be daughters of Our Lady of Compassion. And the motto is sacrifice, love, not love and sacrifice, but love in sacrifice. So that's a really deep meaning. It's walking alongside people with love and in the sacrifice, that there's a cost. As there is in all commitments of love, it's to be truly empathetic, to be truly compassionate. There is a sacrifice, there is a suffering.
Yeah. I suppose it's like Mary, with the little statue next to us, who she couldn't do anything to help Jesus, she could just be with him.
Be with him, and it's embracing the pain. And so with Mary at the foot of the cross, along with other women and St. John, the evangelist, it's being there in Christ's suffering and Christ knowing that they were there. It's that engagement. It's often if you're beside someone in the sick bed and the person is dying or in horrific pain, you can't actually pick it up or make it better or put a band-aid on it. But the person in the bed knows you're there. They know they're not abandoned. And I think that's the love in sacrifice. So you're giving of your very being and spirit to be right with that person in their pain. Yeah. And often you may have experienced yourself when you're with somebody that's very ill or dying, they might hold your hand, and from time to time there's a squeeze, and it's that connection. And you'd have to be a bit like stoned if you didn't engage in that empathy, in being engaged in compassion.